Hi there, Martin Popoff. I'm back for my first review since we launched our Patreon campaign. I want to thank all the donors so far. Very cool. For today's review, we're going to hear what it sounds like when the young pups kind of get together with an old legend. That was the first single from the record we're going to review this week. It's Dee Snider with For the Love of Metal, out today on Napalm Records. I'm guessing most of you know who Dee Snider is, but for those of you who don't, here's a bit of a bio. So Dee Snider, of course, the most important thing Dee is known for, or the biggest thing he's known for, is fronting the notorious Twisted Sister. But Twisted Sister was a big deal. They started off as a very well-respected, super heavy band with the first album, Under the Blade. Of course, their big album was the 4 times platinum Stay Hungry. But they put out 2 records and then that weren't well received, and then they kind of faded away. Dee is just like a human dynamo. He's been into a million things, and this is why people still know who Dee is. He's been a reality TV star. He's had solo albums. He's had the band Widowmaker, Desperado. He put out a solo album in 2016 that was more of a pop thing, and that upset a lot of people. They came around Toronto, where I'm from, and did Twisted Christmas at the Danforth Music Hall, which was very cool. They did a whole a Christmas show for that. So Dee's kind of like a multimedia legend. I was just at a convention called Rockin' Con, and Dee was there signing autographs and stuff. People love this guy. They keep paying attention to him, and he keeps coming back with all sorts of things, of course, including horror movies as well. So here he is with a pure metal album, probably the most pure metal album he's ever done, and that's where we stand today. So here we are with For the Love of Metal. This album came up in a pretty strange way. Jamie Jasta from Hatebreed, who's becoming a bit of a mover and shaker, and also a little bit because of this album, he has a podcast, and he challenged Dee. He said, "Man, Dee, you got to put out a real metal album." Dee said, "Sure, yeah, whatever." But then it started coming together, and Jamie got a couple of his buddies together from his solo band, also Kings of Sorrow, Toxic Holocaust, Nicky Belmore, Charlie Belmore, and they started putting together the music for this, and they wrote the lyrics for this record as well, basically saying, "Dee, we're going to make a completely heavy metal album in the sort of concept of when Halford did the Halford Band." I interviewed Dee for this record, and he talks about it in those terms. The idea was take this iconic singer, put him on top of some metal that is a little more modern. And then what Dee says is that people kept coming out of the woodwork in terms of people from Lamb of God and Arch Enemy, Killswitch Engage, who wanted to be involved and wanted to be in the writing. So they got that going. They started doing this without even a record deal. And Dee says that essentially there was almost like an old style bidding war for them, and they ended up with Napalm Records. So that's where we stand. This album comes from a challenge to Dee to make, once and for all, a true metal album. Before I start going on about this record, let's hear something from it. This is a little bit of I'm Ready. There you go. I'm Ready is kind of like a fast Judas Priest Accept type song. Great production on this record. But as you can tell, there's a very high fidelity modern sound to this album, and what you're going to hear is almost like a mix between modern metal, but not too modern, because Jamie had his antenna up in terms of, writing this record for someone who is from the old school. I mean, as Dee says, I'm patient zero. I mean, he says he was into heavy metal, basically when Black Sabbath came out with their first album, February 1970. He was there. So Jamie was very, attuned to this idea that we want to write a record that's modern, but not too crazy modern. So just to touch down on a couple of tracks, the album opens with Lies Are a Business, which is an interesting song in that it almost quotes the Motorhead Overkill drum beat, and then it takes off and it's just this super fast sort of, quick-paced thing, just like Judas Priest would open an album with a fast song, just like Accept would. It is kind of a formula, but there you go. The album gets off with a super quick tune. We get into Tomorrow's No Concern, American Made. American Made's kind of a cool tune. It reminds me of a little bit of Enter Sandman. It's got that chugging thing. Great groove on here. Again, the band is really cool. The writing is essentially by Nicky and Charlie Belmore, and Jamie's involved. Jamie's definitely big involved into the production. Production is super clean on this, super modern, and that's something you can hear, immediately on a song like American Made. I actually like the back half of the album a lot more, and I think this is where there's a lot of songs that are going to grow on me. There's not a lot of breathing room on this record, but there are definitely a lot of changes in pace. There's a lot of complexity to, where a riff goes into a pre-chorus or into a chorus. An example of this, there's a song called Roll You, which has almost like a Kiss-like chorus, and that's a really cool thing when you hear on here. Jamie did come to Dee and say to him, we don't want to hear you try to sing modern. We want the real Dee Snider. And he says, you sing melodically. So there are spots on here where it kind of rubs you the wrong way, where he kind of goes into a bit of a hardcore vocal. And Dee is smart enough to realize he's got to notch that back, so he doesn't do a lot of that. So some of the better tunes on here are where there are kind of hanging chords. It's a little bit simpler, and this one is a little bit like that. Mask is a super heavy, progressive one. It reminds you a little bit of Lamb of God, accessible Lamb of God, I imagine. A little bit of Slayer on that. And again, here's where we're seeing the new school influence come through, and this pushing Dee to be modern with his metal and not be too old school or too Twisted Sister. Because Twisted Sister, the whole thing about that band was they were trying to be Accept crossed with Judas Priest. They really had a simplistic thing going. They liked to have the two rhythm guitars in unison. So here you get quite a bit more complexity that we're not used to from Dee. I think my favorite track on here is The Hardest Way, which features Howard Jones from Killswitch Engage, but not in a big way. It's still the Dee Snider show, which pretty much has to be on here. But this is just a very accessible, hooky, slightly commercial song amongst a lot of songs that can be pretty smothering. Dead Hearts, Love Thy Enemy features Arch Enemy's Aliza White Glues. It starts kind of acoustic folk, but then it gets quite heavy and doomy, which basically means there are no ballads on this album. But this is really the only place you get, I suppose what you would call folk metal on the record. The record closes out with the title track, For the Love of Metal, and this is one of those funny tunes where Dee basically goes through his record collection and kind of name checks different album titles and phrases from famous metal songs. It's a perfect way to end a record like this. It's a little bit comedic, but it's just a straight, no-nonsense heavy metal tune. As I was saying, there are no ballads on this. This record is completely all business. So here we go. I've been tormented about giving this album a certain number of skulls, and we will get to how many skulls that is. So here's the problem with this. I do feel a little bit critical about the situation because it is a very efficient, airtight, almost claustrophobic, very modern sounding album with perfect production values, the way Andy Sneap, for example, calls desktop metal. It sounds very kind of computery. Now, that's not to say, it's overtly bad. There's definitely tons of bass and treble and crispness, and the playing is amazing on this. The drumming is cool. There are grooves all over the place. But it's a little bit of that nagging thing you feel about how perfect an Accept album can be, how perfect Judas Priest Firepower is, how Saxon has become almost like, superhuman players compared to the way they were in the past. There is a bit of that problem with it. There is also this feel that the record is essentially a Jamie Jasta, Charlie Belmore, Nicky Belmore joint. Dee is coming in as a vocalist, and I'm not crazy about the idea that the lyrics are not Dee's. Dee says these lyrics really spoke to me, and you can tell they were perfectly written for Dee. They do sound like something he would say. And there's a lot of positivity, a lot of that twisted sister, we're going to win, we're going to make it kind of thing. Those are the negatives I would say about this record. Like I say, the entire back half of it, from track 5 to whatever it is, 12 or 13, I had little asterisks on my notes on practically every song, and there's some really cool variety there. It's very progressive, it's very thoughtful, and you can tell that there's so much substance there that these songs will grow on you if you accept the whole premise of Dee being in there singing on a record like this. So there you go. There's some negatives, there's some positives, and for that reason, I'm going to be very disciplined about this. I can almost see how a lot of folks would be quite over the moon with this and give this 4 skulls out of 5 skulls, but I'm going to be disciplined and balance those negatives with positives, and I'm going to give this record 3 skulls out of 5 skulls. Before we go, a couple other releases worth mentioning out this week. Chris Caffrey, one of my favorite guys in metal, started with Savatage. He's basically the leader of Trans-Siberian Orchestra right now. He's got a new record out called The Jester's Court, and it's out on Metalville Records. Another record out this week is from Michael Romeo from Symphony X, a solo record called War of the Worlds Part 1. An album that came out last week comes from new wave of British heavy metal legends Tokyo Blade. I love those guys, they don't get enough credit. They have an album out called Unbroken, and it's on 3M's Music. Thanks for watching. I'd love to see what you think of the Dee Snider records. Please comment below, give it full barrels. I'm really interested to see where you guys lie on this one.